Just an overview. We are in Nome, latitude 64.5, just south of the Arctic Circle in Norton Sound, which is near the Bering Sea. So we are a subarctic and coastal area. Nome, little star. So gold came out of the hills. Gold tends to flow downhill like everything else. Magma deposits and geo events pushed gold up from the core of the earth. Where it came from before that, I'm not really clear. Whether, of course, it was created in stars and suns like everything else. But once it got here, it was pushed up via magma events, plate tectonics, and all of that. Created lode deposits. Gold deposits start out as lode deposits, which means they are locked into a rock, and then they become, the Nome deposit became weathered and was turned into placer gold. So it was released for placer or free gold. So there's lode gold, which is hard rock mining, and then there's free gold or placer gold once it's freed from the rock. There's several ideas on how this was freed from the rock. It happened hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago. Some people think it was extreme freeze-thaw cycling, where water would get in there through alluvial action. Alluvial is basically by way of water. Others think it was rain and water dissolving rocks and freeing the rocks that way. And then there's glacial alluvial action, which means frozen water pushing around things, breaking up rocks, grinding things down. And then glacial thrust, which moved the material down. Rivers also carried material, but the main force in Nome was glaciers. So we have Nome here, and around Nome had that deposit of gold, and there was also glacial action, which pushed that towards the sea, downhill, of course. And the sea level changed over time, over the last few 100,000 years, because of the weight of the ice from glaciation pushed down the plates. The sea levels were lower because the water was taken up in ice formations around the world, and sea levels rose because there was either the plates were pushed down or there's excess water because there was less ice in the world. So the glaciated areas around Nome, these pink areas are where we believe the glaciers occurred. And I apologize to the authors for not citing their who they were. I'm using about 6 different papers, excerpts from about 6 different papers to compile this talk. I'll add them in the excerpts. I'll add them in my PowerPoint presentation when I post it online later this month. So these glaciers in this area also coincided with the placer deposit and around Nome, and there might be a similar deposit, they think, in the this basin over here off of Russia, because the same sort of forces happened. Samples from that area show that it's not as rich as the Nome one, and there hasn't been much economic interest in that deposit.
So those are the pink areas are the glaciers?
Where the glaciers were thought to have extended and kind of fades off because it's not really shown up on the central part of the Seward Peninsula. But not the last ice age from 10,000 years ago, but the one 100,000 years ago, Pleistocene, I think it is. There was heavy glaciation in the Seward Peninsula, and that glaciers moved around. The second to last ice age, or the last ice age, there wasn't glaciation, we think, in Nome as much. It was to the south and
was that?
north.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, but I'm just curious because Chukotka's all pink. Is that just Russia and they just put it on?
I think they just put that and then kind of faded off. And
okay, that's the important
part. And
okay.
So what they think is the Nome area, which is what this was really focusing on, was areas of possible glaciation with a question mark is the actual key there. So these glaciers created a glacial thrust zone as the glaciers moved downhill towards what is now the ocean. And this extent of glacial thrust is basically also the extent of the Nome gold deposit in the ocean. So the key here is you look the 65-foot water line at current water depth. These are ancient beach lines. The 80-foot beach line, the 65-foot beach line, the 35-foot not shown is the 15-foot beach line. This glacial thrust zone pushed the gold out into the sea. So the important takeaway here from this graph, if this information is correct from this study, means that beyond this line, there's not likely to be any commercially viable gold deposits in the ocean. So deeper than 65 to 72 feet, we're not likely to see any commercial operation ever be successful in the ocean, nor beyond the 2.75 mile line, which is about where this glacial extent occurred. Which is good news for those who like their crab hatcheries and crab environments, which tends to be at this 80-foot to 100-foot, 5 to 10 mile off, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, zone where the crab really like to grow up. And then also beyond Rodney Creek and to the east of Hastings Creek, there's not really much gold in the deeper water beyond 15 to 20 feet. So these ancient beach lines that were formed, it's thought that the water line stopped at these elevations for an extended period of time. You have what's the modern beach, which is sort of in the middle there where the water line is. Uphill from that, you have your second beach and your third beach, called the intermediate Monrovian, the third beach and fourth beach at the base of Anvil Peak, or Anvil Mountain. And out in the ocean, you have your 15-foot beach line, which isn't really shown, your 35-foot, 62, and 80. And you see this glaciation caused, or thrust out there and carry the gold-bearing materials, and basically stopped at that 62 to 72-foot beach line. So again, you're not going to see gold deposits or significant amounts of gold beyond that 72-foot water depth. Samples in the 80-foot show that the gold concentrations and gold grade is about the same as average of average Norton Sound, which is called poor or barren. So again, you're not going to see commercially viable operations in the 80-foot or deeper waters. So this transect is a cross-section of the area that's called the west flank, which is just to the west of the jetty, about an eighth of a mile. But it's fairly representative of this area from about 2 miles east to several miles west of the Nome jetty. Another important thing that was found in the research of all the samples that were taken offshore, there were 3,500 samples taken by the Westgold and hundreds, about 700 or more samples taken prior to Westgold's study. And the distribution of gold in those samples is very telling as to where to find gold. So you have 100% gravel in this corner, 100% sand in that corner, silt and clay in the top. The X's is excellent gold, and then the dots are other gold areas. X's are gold content greater than 10 times background. So what you see here is silt and clay have very little economic value. There's almost no gold. There's background or barren gold in silt and clay, and free-flowing sand, more than 50% sand, has some gold, but until you get very little clay and more than 50% gravel, you don't get significant gold. So again, there's not likely to ever be a commercially viable operation that focuses on silt and clay, and an operation dependent on free-flowing sand will not likely be commercially viable, which is something a lot of operations who spend a lot of money building and designing something, expecting free-flowing sand, the golden sands of Nome, they come up and they fail because there's very little economic value to the sand in Nome. But all the value, or the most significant value, is in the gravel, free of silt and clay. That's at least 50% gravel, but it can't have sand. Sand ranging from 10% to about 40%. Gravel in this case includes cobble and that sort. So the sea sediments around Nome, the vast majority of Norton Sound is Yukon silt, and the gravel bands extend basically from Bluff to Sledge Island, and from shore to 5 to 10 miles offshore, which those are the regions where you have distinct bottoms, or bottoms with varying characteristics, according to this study, where you have gravels and cobbles and various characters. Other than that, it's basically a flat, silty bottom. So any animal life or plant life that likes that varied bottom, you tend to be in that Bluff to Sledge region, to about 10 miles offshore. So very little gravel in Norton Sound, and mostly silty except for the northern shore. So, and again, from the earlier slide, most of the gravel, or most of the gold is found in gravelly material. So these ancient